He handed over the black card and they laughed. The next morning, he cancelled a $3.8 billion deal like it was nothing. It was a warm Friday evening at Palm Grove Grand, the most luxurious hotel in Scottsdale, Arizona. The kind of place where the valet opens your door before you even come to a full stop. Elijah Monroe, a 42-year-old black CEO and founder of Vertex Logistics, stepped out of his jet-black Range Rover, his demeanor calm, his presence commanding. Dressed in a tailored grey suit and a discreet Patek on his wrist, Elijah wasn't here for attention. He was here to close a historic merger with Gensa Corp, a deal that had been nearly 3 years in the making. No entourage, no press. Just a man who had built an empire from the ground up, walking into a hotel lobby like any other guest. And yet, no one looked twice. Not the doorman, not the concierge. Not even the front desk clerk who would, in a matter of minutes, make a mistake that would cost them everything. Elijah Monroe wasn't the type to chase headlines. Despite running one of the most advanced logistics AI firms in the country, he had always preferred to lead from the shadows, an operator, not an orator. Known in the tech world as the architect behind supply chain systems used by over 400 companies, he didn't seek fame. He didn't need to. His work spoke for itself. So when he checked into Palm Grove Grand alone, no assistant, no PR rep, no camera flashes, no one thought to wonder who he was. That was exactly how he wanted it. Elijah had a reason for his low profile that evening. While the Gensa Corp team saw this weekend as a corporate celebration, he saw it as a test. Not of financial figures, but of character. Would this luxury hotel, supposedly hand-picked by Gensa as the venue for a monumental merger, treat an unassuming black guest with the same courtesy they'd offer a white executive in a $10,000 suit? He didn't come to impress. He came to observe. Behind the marble check-in counter stood Hannah, a 25-year-old front desk clerk, with polished nails, a practiced smile, and a subtle air of superiority. Raised in nearby Paradise Valley, Hannah had only worked at Palm Grove Grand for 9 months, but carried herself like a veteran of 5-star hospitality. She wasn't intentionally rude, just never learned how to hide her biases. The kind that weren't loud, but came through in her tone, in her posture, in the way she'd assume a guest's importance by their shoes or surname. She had never held a Centurion card in her hand, and if she had, she might have assumed it belonged to someone whiter, older, more typical. To Hannah, Elijah was anything but. She didn't recognize his name, and it didn't occur to her to Google it. Elsewhere in the hotel, Martin Green, Gensa Corp's marketing director, was reviewing the final campaign decks in his suite 2 floors up. A slick communicator in his mid-40s, Martin had championed this merger as a career-defining move. He was confident, media-trained, and clueless about the storm brewing just beneath him. He didn't know that the man meant to finalize the deal had just walked into the lobby, and that within minutes, one of Martin's biggest deals would begin unraveling from a simple, avoidable moment of arrogance. In the corner near the elevator bank, Jace, a 22-year-old bellhop and business student at Arizona State, adjusted his blazer and glanced over to the front desk. Jace had learned to stay invisible on the job, smile, nod, carry bags, repeat. But he noticed things. And when Elijah walked in, he noticed 2 things immediately: the confidence in his posture and the way Hannah's demeanor shifted the second she looked up. Jace had seen that look before, the skeptical smirk, the too long pause. The kind of pause that said, "What are you doing here?" He didn't say anything. He never did. But he watched, silently, as the next few minutes began to unfold, like a scene he'd seen too many times in too many places. This time, though, he sensed it wouldn't end like the others. This man wasn't just any guest. When Elijah reached into his wallet and handed over his Centurion card, the unmistakable black metal one with no spending limit and no application process, Hannah's fingers froze just inches above it. For a beat, she just stared, her eyes narrowing slightly before the corner of her mouth curled into a half smirk. "Wow," she said, the word coated in disbelief. "Haven't seen one of these ever. You sure this is real?" Her tone didn't carry direct malice. It didn't need to. It was the kind of voice people use when they've already decided what kind of person you are before you've said a word. Elijah, composed as ever, gave a patient smile. "Would you like to verify it?" he asked calmly. Hannah gave a light chuckle, then shook her head. It's just, we usually get these from executives. You know, the big guys. She glanced up at him, and something in her eyes flickered, like she didn't believe she was standing in front of one. The words hung in the air like smoke. Behind Elijah, a middle-aged couple seated near the lobby cafe exchanged a look and stifled laughter. One man in a pastel golf shirt snorted under his breath. None of it was loud. But it didn't have to be. It was loud enough. Elijah didn't flinch. Years of boardrooms, private jets, and Ivy League panels had given him thick skin. But this wasn't about thin skin. It was about principle. He had expected a test. This was just sooner than anticipated. So, he asked again, this time more directly, is there a problem? Hannah shrugged, still twirling her pen, then nodded toward the screen. Maybe just try another form of payment. Something more standard? Her voice wasn't cruel, just dismissive. And somehow that was worse. Elijah's smile faded, not into a frown, but into something quieter, steadier. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his phone, and turned slightly to the side. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't make a scene. He simply dialed a number, waited one ring, and said, Raymond, it's me. Cancel the room block. There was a pause, then he continued, his tone razor-sharp but measured. Let Jensa know the deal's off. All meetings are cancelled, no reschedule. Another pause. No explanation, they'll figure it out. He ended the call and slid the phone back into his jacket, then turned back toward Hannah, who stood frozen, blinking. She looked confused, like she knew something had shifted, but didn't yet realize how badly. Elijah leaned in just slightly. Thanks anyway, he said softly. Then he turned, pulled his luggage handle, and walked out without a word more. Behind him, the lobby fell awkwardly quiet. A few guests looked up from their drinks, sensing something had just happened, but unsure what. Hannah stood still, blinking fast now, her earlier confidence quietly unraveling. Jace, the bellhop, who had been standing near the concierge desk, didn't move. But he knew. Everyone who had truly been watching knew. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a message. By the time Elijah Monroe's name finally registered in the system, it was too late. The general manager of Palm Grove Grand, a man named Brent Halverson, was summoned from a dinner meeting with regional investors and rushed back to the lobby only to find the revolving doors still spinning from Elijah's exit. Within the hour, emails started flooding in from Genza Corp's executive team. One subject line read simply, "Why did Monroe walk?" The answer came not from an internal report or phone call, but from a viral tweet posted by Jace, the quiet bellhop who had witnessed the entire exchange. He wrote, I just watched a man get humiliated for carrying a black card. He didn't shout, he didn't argue. He just made a call and walked out like someone who didn't need to prove a thing. That's not anger, that's power. The tweet exploded, retweeted over 90,000 times in 6 hours, with a flood of comments from entrepreneurs, black professionals, and everyday people sharing eerily similar experiences. The incident, first contained within the walls of a Scottsdale hotel lobby, quickly spilled across the internet, igniting think pieces, podcast debates, and a hashtag #Black Card Backlash. When the team at Genza Corp finally connected the dots and realized the man Hannah had dismissed at the front desk was not just another guest, but the very CEO set to finalize a $3.8 billion merger, they went into full crisis mode. Elijah's assistant confirmed that all further communication from Vertex Logistics had ceased. Within 24 hours, the story hit the financial wires. Black CEO rejected at hotel, calls off $3.8 billion deal, read the headline on Bloomberg. CNBC was next. MSNBC followed. The scandal wasn't just corporate, it was cultural. By Monday morning, Genza's stock price had dropped 14%, shedding over $600 million in market value. Investors were panicking, journalists were circling. And the hotel, Palm Grove Grand's PR team, released a bland one-paragraph statement that mentioned an unfortunate incident currently under internal review. But it was too little, too late. Social media didn't need more confirmation. It had found its hero in Elijah Monroe, a man whose silence said everything. On LinkedIn, business leaders praised his composure. On Twitter, activists dissected the layers of implicit bias in high-end service industries. Even celebrities began weighing in. A viral Instagram story showed an NBA player reposting Jace's tweet with the caption, "This is how we move. Quiet, sharp, unapologetic." Meanwhile, hotel staff scrambled behind the scenes. Hannah had been removed from the schedule pending investigation, but the damage had already been done. Employees were being interviewed by HR and legal teams. One internal Slack message leaked to the press read, "We just lost the face of the future, and he didn't even raise his voice." What made it all sting worse for the hotel, and Jensa, wasn't just the money, it was the optics. Elijah hadn't demanded anything. He hadn't asked for a room upgrade, a public apology, or a second chance. He had simply observed the situation, made a decision, and acted with quiet finality. That restraint, that control, became the most powerful statement of all. And because he didn't try to explain himself, the world filled in the silence with truth. Elijah Monroe had become a symbol, not just of corporate excellence, but of measured dignity in the face of casual disrespect. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. His absence made more noise than most people's outrage ever could. Elijah never called a press conference. He didn't issue a statement, grant interviews, or post a single comment on social media. But that didn't stop the truth from finding its way out. Late Sunday night, an anonymous article appeared on Medium, written under the name EM. It didn't confirm identities, didn't mention brands, but the message was unmistakable. "I don't need to raise my voice to be heard. I just leave the room when it no longer deserves my presence." The post went viral within hours, shared across Twitter, LinkedIn, and group chats like wildfire. For those who had followed the hotel incident, there was no doubt this was Elijah Monroe. And the world wanted to know more. Almost instantly, reporters and digital sleuths began piecing together the man behind the silence. They found archived interviews, old conference footage, and a long-forgotten article from a Tulsa newspaper. The picture became clear. Elijah Monroe wasn't born into power. He was the son of Charlene Monroe, a single mother and administrative assistant who raised Elijah and his brother in a two-bedroom house in Midwest City, Oklahoma. His father had passed when he was just 7, and it was Charlene who taught him to iron his shirts, speak with clarity, and never assume fairness would find him. It had to be built. In high school, Elijah had applied for the state's most prestigious academic scholarship, the kind of award reserved for the faces of the school system. His GPA was perfect, his test scores top tier, his volunteer hours unmatched, but the award went to a student with lower scores, a cleaner pedigree, and a family with ties to the state education board. The sting of that loss never fully left him. Instead of dwelling, he channeled it. He worked nights in a print shop, paid his own way through Oklahoma State, and taught himself to code after classes ended. After graduation, he launched a basic inventory tracking software in his garage, just enough to help his uncle's car parts business manage supply. That modest system grew into Vertex Logistics, now one of the leading AI-driven supply chain firms operating across 4 continents. 20 years of quiet grind, no scandals, no flash, just relentless momentum. What stunned people wasn't just his professional trajectory, it was how little they had heard of him before this moment. The silence wasn't accidental. Elijah had long believed that power didn't require a megaphone. But now his silence had been forced into the spotlight. On Monday afternoon, his older sister Marissa tweeted a single line that would frame the public narrative. They didn't know that Black Card represented 20 years of sweat, sacrifice, and self-discipline. And that clerk's laugh. It lit a fuse she didn't even know existed. The post garnered over 300,000 likes in under 12 hours. Suddenly, Elijah's story wasn't just about a deal gone wrong. It was about what happens when dignity meets dismissal, when quiet excellence is mistaken for insignificance, and when someone who's built everything from nothing decides that the insult isn't worth correcting. It's worth exposing. The public didn't need Elijah to speak. The story had already begun telling itself. On Sunday morning, while headlines still swirled and Twitter threads multiplied by the hour, Elijah Monroe quietly walked into a small lecture hall at Southridge University, just as he had promised weeks before. There were no reporters, no PR team, no security detail. Just a room of about 40 students, most of them young black men and women studying business, tech, and law, some of whom were still refreshing news sites on their phones, half in disbelief that the man sitting at the front of the room was the same figure dominating national coverage. He didn't start with a speech. He just looked around the room, nodded at a few familiar faces from previous sessions, and said, "Let's talk." What followed was less a lecture and more a conversation, a kind of open dialogue that felt more like a family gathering than a mentoring seminar. At one point, a student in a navy hoodie raised his hand and asked, "How do you know when it's time to speak up and when it's time to walk away?" Elijah paused, folded his hands, and answered, "Power isn't always about who can shout the loudest. Real power is knowing when silence will say more than any statement ever could. When you've done everything right and they still laugh at you, that's when you stop explaining. That's when you walk." He went on to talk about the moments that shaped him, not the boardroom wins or product launches, but the nights he slept 3 hours because code wouldn't compile, the job interview where they thought he was the intern, the investor who asked if Vertex's founder would be joining them shortly, even after Elijah introduced himself. Dignity, he told them, isn't what they give you. It's what you don't let them take. A young woman near the front, her notebook already filled with half a page of scribbles, asked softly, "So what now? What do you do when your silence gets louder than their noise?" Elijah smiled, not arrogantly, but like someone who had learned the weight of his words. "Then you let them listen," he said. "You let the absence speak for itself. Because when people realize they've lost something they didn't know they had, they start to pay attention." His voice was calm, deliberate. He didn't name the hotel, he didn't mention Gensar, but everyone in the room understood. After the session, several students came up to shake his hand. One young man, no older than 19, gripped Elijah's palm tightly and said, "My dad's a janitor. He watched you on the news and said you walked away like a king." Elijah looked him in the eyes and said, "Then your dad knows exactly what real strength looks like." Outside, as he walked toward the parking lot, a few students followed him, still asking questions, still absorbing the energy of someone who had turned insult into instruction. And though his phone continued to buzz with missed calls, media requests, and corporate speculation, Elijah didn't check it. Not yet. This moment wasn't about controlling a narrative. It was about honoring a promise, about reminding the next generation that true leadership isn't about revenge. It's about value. And when you know your value, the room doesn't validate you. You validate the room. 1 month later, the lobby of Palm Grove Grand looked different. Not in decor, but in energy. A press conference was hastily assembled beneath a crystal chandelier as the hotel's general manager read from a carefully worded statement filled with apologies, promises of diversity training, and references to a regrettable incident. But the cameras didn't care. The world already knew the story, and so did the shareholders. Bookings were down, influencers had withdrawn endorsements, and hashtag boycott Palm Grove trended for days. Still, Elijah Monroe never stepped foot back into the building. He had no reason to. He was exactly where he needed to be. Back in Seattle, sitting in his corner office at Vertex HQ, where the glass wall behind him framed a view of the water, still and commanding. On his desk sat a simple folder labeled Q4 Expansion. Inside was the final signed contract with Corvex International, a competitor to Gensar and now a new partner. The deal was valued at nearly $5.7 billion, nearly double what had been on the table with Gensar just weeks before. Raymond, his COO, had entered the room earlier and simply said, "They came to us." No pitch needed. Elijah nodded but said nothing. He wasn't celebrating. This wasn't revenge, it was correction. What caught his eye, though, wasn't the contract. It was a small handwritten note tucked beside his keyboard. It was from one of the students at Southridge University, slid into his hand after the mentoring session and nearly forgotten amidst the chaos. On thick cream paper it read, "Thank you for reminding us that we don't have to fight for a seat at the table when we've already become the table." He read it again, slowly, letting the words settle, not as a compliment, but as a confirmation, a quiet truth. Sometimes the lesson you leave behind echoes louder than anything you could say out loud. And for Elijah, that lesson had already begun reshaping more than hotel policies and corporate mergers. It was shifting the expectations of what power looks like and how it moves. Disrespect doesn't always come from open aggression. Sometimes it hides behind polite smiles, underestimations, and assumptions, especially when you don't look like what they expect success to be. True strength is not reactive, it is intentional. It is choosing restraint when provoked, clarity when confused, and dignity when dismissed. Elijah's story isn't about walking out of a hotel, it's about walking into your value and knowing when to stop explaining it. You don't owe recognition to anyone who refuses to see you clearly. The moment you sense you're being tolerated instead of respected, that's your cue, not to fight, but to exit, calmly, clearly, powerfully. Because the most transformational change rarely comes with fanfare. As the sun began to dip behind the Seattle skyline, Elijah leaned back in his chair, watching the horizon fade into soft amber light. The world was still talking, but he didn't need to. His silence had already said everything. If this story moved you, it wasn't just because of the billions lost or the headlines made. It's because it reminded us that dignity doesn't need volume to make an impact. Elijah Monroe didn't retaliate with rage. He didn't plead for recognition. He walked away, calm and composed, and let the consequences speak louder than any protest ever could. In a world where judgment is often delivered in a glance and respect is unevenly distributed, his silence became a storm, a quiet, deliberate storm that shook an entire system. At X Daily Stories, we believe stories like this deserve to be told. Stories where strength isn't measured by how loudly you shout, but by how gracefully you walk away. Stories that uplift, challenge, and inspire you to rethink what power truly looks like. If you found value in today's story, if you saw yourself, your family, or your future in Elijah's journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join a growing community that believes in powerful storytelling with a purpose. New stories drop every week, each one crafted to leave you thinking long after the screen goes dark. Subscribe now to X Daily Stories, where silence speaks and every story matters.